Howdy, howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast number 381, The Thought Process Lens Selection. I know you guys are doing well. I heard from a lot of you, and I'm very grateful for all the kind words. I'm also very grateful that you tuned in to the last podcast. So many of you wanted to know if I was going to do one about lens selection, and it's one of the a number that I'm going to do on this series about the thought process. So I appreciate hearing from you and knowing that it's something that's on your mind. And of course, I'm really grateful for your kind words. So thank you ever so much. I want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera, bedfords.com. Yes, they are the source of innovative new gear. I mentioned on the website this past week the hi hat, and a couple of you said you never had heard of it, you'd seen it, and yeah, it is one of those incredible tools that those in the know just can't live without. And Bedford's, hey, they're the place where you can find such tools. They've got experts there that can help you with all sorts of good stuff, as well as they got the inventory and the pricing, and of course, home of the Moose discount. So, Bedford Camera, bedfords.com. Thank you, folks, for sponsoring and continuing sponsoring moi, as well as the podcast, and all the rest of us on our photographic endeavors. Well, I'm going to get right into this week's podcast. Oh, wait, before I forget, yes, I'm looking at my notes. That's rare. I don't usually look at my notes. What good are notes if you don't look at them? I've wondered that sometimes. Anyway, the podcast is once again being done with the Apple Podcast Beta, and the transcript will be located on the blog post for the podcast on the website, moosepeterson.com. And I don't know if you noticed, but at the very, very bottom, almost to the bottom, you will see a grid of 9 images. That is the home to basically the images that I've taken when I'm on an adventure with folks, so you can see what we're doing. I've updated continually. There are literally thousands of images there. So if you have time, you need inspiration, looking for ideas, that's there for you too. Okay, now I'll get into this week's episode because I'm now caught up with my notes, outline, script. No, I don't have a script. Oh, Lordy. No, you don't ever think I'm that organized. All right. The thought process, lens selection. Now, in the past, I have kind of given you my basic kind of what lens am I going to grab when I'm in the vehicle and I see something and I want to go shoot. So, just to cover that, because there are always new folks coming to the podcast, even though they say podcasts are dying again. So, when I step out of the vehicle, whatever it is, my truck, snow coach, plane, whatever it is, if I move my head and my eyes up and down all around, so I'm moving my head and my eyes, typically going to go to the 14 to 24. If I don't move my head, but I move my eyes around, I'll probably grab the 24 to 70. If I just stare out, then I'm going to select at the very least 7200, 400, or 600. With that said, those folks who have gone with me shooting, especially Sharon, they can tell you that there are many times, probably more often than not, that when I get out and I'm not sure right off the bat what lens to grab, I will go through that general scenario I just mentioned, and then I will start with that lens and often go back and change. Now, why is that? Well, part of it is for sure our peripheral vision. Now, that peripheral vision, which is almost 120 degrees horizontal and almost 90 vertical, according to the FAA, our peripheral vision is just not made for a camera, and that's okay. You just have to understand how to, deal with it. That's why we're doing a podcast on the thought process, lens selection. Now, I just gave you my basic formula. When do I not go with that formula? There are very certain times when I will break from that. First example, I'm doing it air to air. I'm on a photo mission. I'm going to grab the 7200. And with the mirrorless system, for a while I was attaching the 1.4x, and the last two photo missions I have not. I've been happier, even though I don't have that extra f32 that I obtain when I put on that 1.4x. It's been just a little bit too much lens when I do attach at the 7200. So, photo mission, boom, 7200 on the Z9, done deal. If I'm going after birds, I'm going to grab the Z600F4 TC. Now, the TC stands for teleconverter, and it means there's an internal 1.4. And when it's engaged, it makes that 600F4 into 845.6. And I have to tell you, I'll be really honest, I don't know how I ever lived without a TC lens. The physically attaching a teleconverter, when it comes to being, kind of stealthy, when that critter's looking at you, when you have to lock things down and push a lever and rotate a body and all that, not having to do that and just flipping a lever, which, you can't even, nothing can tell you're doing that. Big, big, big benefit. Now, with that said, if I know that the physical distance between myself and my subject, I'm in a hide, I'm on a boat, there's a ravine, life threatening, but yeah, that never happens. Any of those scenarios, I'm probably going to put the external 1.4 teleconverter on that Z600 F4TC. So then I end up with 1680 millimeters. Now, that very narrow angle of view that brings, and we need to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. When I add teleconverters or subtract or go wider, my entire focus, sorry, bad pun, but not intentional, is not on the image size. Not the image size. If you go back a couple days on my Instagram, you'll see one of my favorite photographs I've taken in a long time. It's of a black-capped chickadee. And I absolutely love those guys. If you follow the website, I've blogged about them here at the homestead, and I absolutely just love those guys. And when I can take something real tiny, because chickadees are really small, and have them really small in the frame, yet smack you, the viewer, right between the eyes with them, that is my favorite kind of critter photography. And you see I think, a great example of it there on my Instagram account. So when I talk about adding teleconverters to already a long lens, it's all about the angle of view and totally, totally narrowing it down to, it's less than 1 degree when I have the 600 TC with its internal 1.4 engaged with an external 1.4 engaged. The angle of view is less than 1 degree, and that allows me to move left or right, up or down just an inch, and totally change the background. And that's the real point I want to get to when it comes to the thought process, lens selection. And it's really, I'm really at a challenge to explain it to you verbally, because you don't have visuals. And I think even people who shoot right next to me, they probably think I've got ants in my pants, more than the fact that I'm really, really, really trying to just fine tune that background to the nth degree, because setting the stage for our star, Stage is my word for background. Star is the word for my word for subject. But setting that stage from that star is really critical because that's how you tell your story. And that's what lenses are all about. That's what lens selection is, why it's so important and why it can be so frustrating. We're visual storytelling. And in that process, we have to um, be like a writing editor, and we have to throw out words that cloud the point, that are flowery, that don't, hone our attention right down to the subject and the story we want to tell about them. You could think in real honest terms that lens is that, you know, editorial writing editor. And you want to take that lens and you want to use it literally to focus in on that subject and then bring in just enough of the world around it to tell a story. And that's part of the dance, which I haven't talked about for quite a while. And that dance is including all the elements in the frame that you want while excluding all of those that you don't want. The elements that set the stage and tell a story, those are the ones you want. And the ones that distract from that, you need to exclude. And your lens selection is a big part of that because, first and foremost, you have the ability to go left and right, up or down, no matter what the focal length, and you can change in sometimes incredibly massive ways that background. At the same time, as you do this, depending on the lens you select in that lens selection process, determine how much depth of focus you're going to have. If I go back to that photograph of the black-capped chickadee, in that particular scenario, I had the 600 f4 TC with the internal 1.4 engaged with a Z2X converter on there. The quality of this combo produces is still to me staggering. You got to remember, I'm kind of an old fart. I have all that gray hair for a reason. And I remember the old days where I used to use a TC301. And I go, wow, why did I use that TC301? Not really as sharp as I want. Now, it's real easy to blame teleconverters for sharpness issues because when you get to a longer and longer focal length, your movement becomes more and more magnified and images become less and less sharp. I'm not bragging, but I don't have that issue. I practice nearly every day with that long lens on a tripod. But that very narrow angle of view, one of the sidekicks is the fact that it has a very narrow depth of focus. And that plane of focus, it allows you to just snap that sucker, that subject, that star beautifully. And the background starts to get soft. And that ability, you got to keep in mind that going back to that black cap chickadee photograph, I'm using a number of things to really truly manipulate your vision and the storytelling. One is the mind's eye goes to light and bright first, goes to sharpness second. So you've got those two things, so you can't help but see that chickadee. I'm smacking you right between the eyes with that. Then I had, and it was really diligent about moving that lens so I had just enough bows in the right side of the frame. So you got some of that. What was that plant? Oh lordy, I suck at plant names. I'm sorry. Alder. It was an alder. Anyway, those purple maroonish leaf seed pods on it dangling there, that real soft color. Then you had the snow, and I used ISO in this particular instance to actually have a slower shutter speed, so the snow was a little bit more defined, and all that it went into the lens selection to make the photograph, and that's really probably the part that really makes folks kind of stumble for a second. Photography is, I don't want to say complicated because I don't think it's complicated. If I can do it, you folks can do it. Complicated is putting 5-inch cherry molding around bullnose drywall that wasn't put up correctly and getting the angles right. That's complicated. That's a lot of math. This photography, it's really you got to follow your heart. And that's probably the one thing about lens selection that kind of stumbles folks. You're telling a story. What lens did you want to pull out of your kit? Expresses that story the fullest to the point where you go out and reach other folks' heartstrings. And there is no focal length that is associated with pulling heartstrings. There is no one focal length that's associated to telling a story. And the lenses that I mentioned, whether you own them or not, doesn't mean you will come back with the same photographs at the same time in the same way. And that is a big part and beauty of photography. Don't think you need to get the 600 f4TC. You could get the Z600 6.3. It's less than half the price. It's a third of the price, I think. I don't really keep up prices. But you're on a tripod. If you're worried about shutter speed, you just raise your ISO. Everybody just raises ISO anymore, despite what it might do to image quality. And you just shoot because you're having fun. And that's the whole thing. And that's probably the most important part of lens selection. Can't emphasize this enough. It's all about having fun. It is all about having fun. There are times, this is going to sound weird, but I've already sounded weird 381 times in these podcasts. So what's the difference? There are times I will grab a lens strictly because that's the lens I want to shoot with. At that moment, it seems sexy to me. At that moment, it feels good in my hand. And with that, I'll zoom with my feet. I'll use some other parlor tricks like depth of focus or changing my angle of view or changing the direction of light. And I'll make that lens work just because I want to shoot with that lens. And that has to do with the fun factor. And when you are embracing fun, the thought process really gets simpler, lens selection gets clearer, photographs become more distinct. You folks have a marvelous week. Thanks so much for dropping by. And remember to make every click your story.